So, hi, my name's Nick Ford. I do a lot of things, even though I profess to be a slacker and a lazy good for nothing. One of the things is I have a blog called abolishwork.com. Some people hear this and say, he just wants to do nothing, and what a lazy person. And at least, no, I'm good. At least one of those things are true, that I'm definitely lazy. Abolish work revolves around the concept of work not as effort, but as a form of labor that people engage in. Not because they want to, but because they only want the external reward involved. The job doesn't make them happy, they have no internal motivation to do it, and it isn't actually what they want to do. So, stereotypical low-paying retail job or at a fast food restaurant are some good general examples. Though that's not to say nobody could enjoy it. And for instance, I'm sure some managers definitely enjoy that job because it gives them a sense of control that they don't have with the rest of their life. Now they can control workers. So regardless, some people, clean their rooms not because they want it clean or they want to do clean, but for example, live up to someone else's expectations of who they are as a person. Would I consider that work? I mean, maybe. It strikes me that the person involved would probably be feeling pretty miserable about it. They wouldn't actually want to be doing it. They're not doing it for themselves. They're doing it for other people, which sort of strikes me sort of as altruistic in the objectivist sense, to be super libertarian for a second. But the title of this talk is still seeming to imply that I do want us all to do nothing because, as I say, better alternative than doing something. So part of the reason for this title is obviously its abrasiveness. It's effective at sort of communicating a message. What that message is, leave you to decide. Now, I do probably think there are some situations where it is actually literally true that doing nothing is preferable to doing something. But it isn't an absolute preference or value. It's a relative value. I'll get more into that later. So there's a lot of busyness in this world. One of the worst cases for me is running on someone else's schedule. I hate doing that. When I'm trying to travel and I have to go to places like ISFLC or Liberty Forum, whatever, I usually have to go by bus or by train, or I have to go by other people's schedules, which is a huge hassle for me. I have organizational issues. It's not pleasant. And this is basically the same situation for everyone, except perpetually if they're working under someone, if they have a boss or something like that. So I certainly think that there are circumstances when doing nothing is better than doing something. To give an example, there was recently a protest against cops in Boston for the Michael Brown shooting in Ferguson that happened a few months back, or even more than that. And I was in the area. I could have gone. I actually live in Worcester, but I happened to be in Boston at the time. It was my mother's birthday, and we were seeing a movie. Rip Tracks, actually. Great stuff. But there were some things against me. I didn't know what was going on until it actually happened, so I was mentally unprepared for it. I also needed to consider the potential risk of getting arrested, however slimmer those are, because I'm white and because I'm male and because I'm seemingly able-bodied. But I'm lower on the economic spectrum, so it would be pretty costly to me if, for example, I got arrested or if cops bashed my head in or something like that, my head in. I also didn't have a place to stay because I didn't know what was going on until then. So there were a lot of negatives, big risks that I had to keep in mind. What were the potential benefits? I mean, maybe I could meet some cool people and maybe I'd find a place to stay. I wasn't really willing to sort of saddle my friends with, hey, I'm in the area and I just randomly need a place to stay. But that required, finding people to talk to and getting them to trust me enough to do that. So the sad truth, I just concluded, there was just a basic problem that I just wasn't convinced the protest was going to do anything. So I just concluded that the cops are going to keep killing other people, that it felt just like waving signs in the streets wouldn't do anything radically different or cause anything big to happen. Appealing to the public, the cops, to the state house, whatever they were doing. It just seemed kind of like a hopeless endeavor. Not that I didn't respect their intentions. I respected the hell of their intentions. At this point, it is crazy. It is becoming sort of a crazy thing to actually protest openly in the streets because of what the cops are doing to people. And it does certainly matter if you're black or white, but they will go after white people too, especially if you're disabled. So, what did I do? Well, I did nothing. So I felt really guilty about it. I felt pretty bad about it, actually. I felt like I should be there, and I should be helping in some way, even though I wasn't sure how, and I didn't know what I needed to be doing, what the hell can I do, other than this sort of intuitive feeling that I had guilt about it. And that alone wasn't really a compelling reason. Plus, I kind of wanted to see my partner that night. I'm risking not being able to see my partner that night or for a long time if I actually get hurt by the cops. So in situations like this, there are a lot of costs and benefits to go through, but in the end, when you know so little about everything, and there are some big things like housing and healthcare that are uncertain, it just makes more sense to do nothing, at least relative to the protest. So what is nothing? So let's back up a little bit because a lot of our dialogues these days sort of preconceive the notion of nothing as being bad, or if you did nothing all day, then you're likely to feel bad about yourself, or at least that's what people on OkCupid say, whatever. But what does nothing mean? I know that the question kind of sounds inane, but does nothing even exist? Sounds like the beginning of the Vsauce video, but so sure, people say there's nothing in there when you tell them that object X is in location Y. But by nothing, they don't actually mean, obviously, nothing. They just mean object X isn't in there. And when people tell you that nothing is wrong, well, usually something is wrong. Indeed, the concept of nothing seems much more of a relative nature than an absolute one. We can't say that there is nothing inside of us, though we may feel that way if we're especially down. I know people who feel this way sometimes, and it's really awful. It's hard to relate to. Physiologically, obviously, that's not true. Any more than that, I don't feel qualified to speculate about. I'm not going to get into this big dialogue about the soul. But it's worth pointing out that when most people use the term nothing, they're using it very relative to whatever else something is supposed to be. So, for instance, when I didn't go to the protest, instead I went back to Worcester, so I could better guarantee seeing my partner that night. An angry activist could say I did nothing about oppression. But that presumes that going to the protest would have been something in the sense that it would have been useful to further those ends of people who were against oppression. Since I wasn't sure that that was the case, I'd probably respond that I'd rather do nothing than something. So therein lies the rub. People are throwing around the word doing nothing, or the phrase doing nothing carefree, without thinking about what it actually means. Those people in OkCupid who answered the question about how would you feel if you did nothing, you just lounge around all day, usually say they conjure up pretty unproductive things. But they aren't thinking about doing nothing, but rather doing nothing productive or meaningful for themselves. Maybe that means lying around on the couch and binge watching House of Cards on Netflix or something like that. Or maybe it means watching a bunch of movies, doing a bunch of drugs, and then eating a lot of bad food before sleeping for the rest of the day. Whatever exactly they mean by nothing, it probably actually amounts to something. It just isn't a lot of something, to be precise. It's a very small amount of something. So that isn't to say that they don't get anything out of these movies, or bad food, or excess sleep, but perhaps not what they want to get out of their day. In that sense, their day may be filled with more nothing than something. But is that state of affairs always objectionable? I don't think so. For example, there's this notion of taking some R&R, rest and relaxation days for yourself. Usually these are not only containing activities that contribute to a day normally being filled with nothing, but instead that's sort of their primary purpose, to fill up your day doing nothing. One of my friends, who's kind of into objectivism, was like, I can't wait to do nothing all weekend. She's all about productivity and stuff like that. And it was just funny because normally she'd be like, that's so wasteful and all this other stuff. I'm not making fun of her. I mean, she's awesome, but so anyway, from those sort of R&R days, you could actually say that you turn nothing into something. What would normally be nothing is actually it means a lot to you because it helps you to deal with the world a lot better. It's why a lot of people come to events like this because it helps them relax. Now, a lot of this just seems kind of inane or obvious. But I think inanity, as someone who's critiqued me on this, there's actually an article specifically devoted to me and how inane my philosophy is. But I think inanity is actually sometimes useful. Because just as with nothing, it's like a Monty Python sketch, right? Like a lot of those, if anyone's familiar with Monty Python, there's sort of a comedy troupe in the 70s that had a lot of sort of absurdist kind of philosophical sketches that usually didn't amount to much. They didn't usually go anywhere. Sometimes, in fact, they'd have the narrator say, all right, that's enough. This is getting too silly. Cut to the next sketch. And they literally have the next sketch interrupt the previous sketches. But this is too silly. And end it now. But just as with nothing, people are said to be engaging in inane things whenever they're engaging in something very much like nothing, or at least relative to whatever the person who's doing the judging. Not that there's something wrong inherently with being a judger. But there's also a point of discussing nothing and something in a philosophical sense, which I've been doing a little bit, which is to explore our value systems. Why do we think that some things are nothing, and why do we think other things are something? I'd argue that answering this question helps us sort of reevaluate our actions throughout our life, and indeed on a day-to-day basis helps us deal with the world and sort of our day-to-day tasks. So all this boils down to is sort of what is meaningful to us and what do we derive meaning from. If I want to write an essay, and instead I decide to watch a bunch of awful 80s music videos, I've certainly done nothing in the sense that I've negated my previous sort of intention. But what if this negation leads to creation? What if this sort of procrastination or active creation of nothing leads, or what might be people call laziness, is actually a good way to do something in the future. So I've argued for this before on my blog, Polished Work, on a post called Laziness, a great way to get stuff done. So in it, I suggest that the reader think about a time that they've, among other things, lost something. So I posit that often what helps people find something that they've lost, like a physical object, like your keys or something, isn't constantly thinking about it until like you want your head to explode. It's usually giving yourself a second, sitting down, thinking about something else, doing something else, maybe even turning your attention completely somewhere else. With the point being that you went and did something else, or within the category of searching, you did nothing. And eventually it just sort of hits you. You think about it, you're like, oh yeah, I left my keys, blah, 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 wherever. And so like, okay. So, because sometimes after doing or not doing all that stuff, it comes back to you. The sort of solution hits you, the thing that you forgot comes into your head as quickly as it left. The lack of effort you put into it is definitely a factor. And this is why people often suggest that either sit down, take a breather, maybe focus on something else for a bit. Constantly worrying yourself about something is often a much better way to unnecessarily stress yourself out than it is to actually find what you're looking for to begin with. And trust me, I'm an expert on this. When I lose something, I do not take this advice very well. I just flagrantly, I go a little crazy, especially after a few minutes. I always got to calm myself down. I'm like, it's not the end of the world. Not the end of the world. Oh my God, it's the end of the world. I got to calm myself down. And sort of within the same topic, I also mentioned that we always have goals in mind that we want, that we're sort of always striving towards or trying to do something about. But it's helpful to keep in mind that sometimes we're wrong about our goals, or even if we're right, that they're causing such a disproportionate amount of unhappiness in the process that it's good to at least be self-critical about whether we should keep going or not. There are certain situations where doing nothing won't be useful, such as in time-sensitive events, say that you're organizing an event, that causes a lot of sort of temporary unhappiness and stress, but in the long run, it'll make you feel better. So I'm an organizer, I help organize AltExpo. It can be kind of stressful sometimes because you got to get a lot of the anarchists and libertarian people together in one room, and it's crazy because none of you people listen to anybody, and it's like you're about freedom or something. I don't know, it's weird. It's tricky. It takes a lot of focus and a lot of attention span, which I clearly do not have. So in situations like that, it's a bit more tricky. I wouldn't claim a hard and fast rule that doing nothing is just better, because there's certainly been times where I'm just like, I thought the AltExpo schedule was done 3 or 4 times, and then it wasn't, and I'm just like, can I just leave it alone? Can I just put it there and it'll just fix itself? No, it won't. You got to do something about it. So anyway, what does it mean to do something? So conversely, there's this idea that everyone wants to do something in their life. You hear this in TV shows, movies, and sometimes even in real life. Someone has finally had enough with being dissatisfied with the way their life is going and exclaim, I'm just going to do something with my life, man. So this internal drive to feel like you need to create and investigate values and meanings in your life are what drives a lot of people out of bad situations, or sometimes the converse. To give a rather personal example, I've been living in New England almost my whole life, and I feel like the time is right to do something else, to go somewhere else, go travel, do something, see other friends. This desire for something comes from this notion that what I'm actually doing right now is actively sabotaging any new or interesting meaning or values coming into my life, which may be a bit hyperbolic, but hopefully you get my point. People usually break down and change their lives, or sometimes even change it little by little as time goes on, because their values change and they want to live more in accord with their current values. Sometimes they involve the love of hobbies of theirs that they want to take more seriously, but haven't been doing so. Other times they're more social in nature and require the individual to seek out others who may share these values. All these internal conflicts are a lot of the reason why I just don't buy the argument that if we reduce the amount of time that people had to work, that they just sit around and watch Netflix all the time. And hence nothing would get done, society would be in shambles, trash in the streets, it'd be anarchy. But I think John Danaher of Philosophical Dispositions counters this point handedly. He has a post called "Should We Abolish Work?" And he says, it's not clear to me that things will be any worse in a world without work. People have basic psychological needs, e.g. for autonomy, competence, and relatedness, that will drive them to do things in the absence of reward. So I don't have a day job. I don't have a day job in the traditional 9-to-5 cubicle sense. I still have a to-do list I give myself every day. Doesn't mean I always do it. But I try to. I busy myself with writing, video editing, debating, talking to friends, or whatever. I find ways to make myself busy. But most of the things I'm busy with, I actually really want to do. I want to do in some sense. Or I'm getting some sort of reward out of it, but I still want to do it. It means sometimes that, to me, I derive pleasure, good outcomes, and more from these activities. Many of these activities, such as writing, playing music, playing music or debating are sort of teleological. I do them for their own sake. So even though my life isn't centered around any sort of institutionalized form of work that most people find themselves in, I somehow manage not to binge watch all my favorite shows sometimes, but I'm not very nice. My greater flexibility, absolutely, and plus my penchant to be lazy sometimes means it take a bit longer to do things than other people might. But you can ask pretty much anybody I've ever tried to do something for. I get stuff done. If I really have my heart in something and I want to do it, I'll get it done. Because if I don't do it, it'll really gnaw away at me. And for most people, it seems like they struggle with deriving meaning from the universe rather than just giving up or doing whatever first comes to mind. Anecdotally speaking, I don't have statistics or anything, but most people just don't seem to fall over themselves once they're given greater control of their lives. We saw this in the alternative schooling talks. I don't know if anybody went to, but the Albany Free School. You give kids all that freedom, and you don't put a lot of structure and pressure on them, and they learn. They learn on their own. They don't need. The Sudbury Valley School in Framingham, Mass. has been doing this since the 60s, the late 60s, early 70s, and they're really successful. They have books about how many kids sort of remember the time that they were there very fondly and all the freedom they had. And I think it's very compatible with libertarianism. So, they instead, people try to fill up their lives with important things to them that make them feel like they're really contributing to the world. The world doesn't have to be, by the way, a literal world. It could just be the libertarian community or whatever community you're living in. But the point is that people aren't inherently good or evil. It makes no sense to say that people, if not given a structure by some external authority, are just going to do whatever they want. They're going to go crazy. Or that they're necessarily going to do whatever gives them the most pleasure instead of what makes sense given the costs and benefits. We see a lot of people sitting around watching TV or doing things that we think are wasteful, largely because of the structure that's imposed upon them. You see people coming back from work and they just binge watch Netflix until they want to go to sleep and eat a bunch of junk food. It's like a lot of the reason why they're doing that, and I can speak from experience, I think other people can too, is because they don't want to think about the other parts of their life that they're unhappy with. People use that to compensate for that stuff all the time. I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying it's what happens, not judging. Because I've done it too. So I know when I worked in retail, again, I'd be more likely to spend money on things that in the short run would give me a lot of pleasure, and to make up for the fact that I was working in a job that I didn't like. Didn't really want to think about it too much, and I didn't want my lack of pleasure for around 8 hours of my day to sort of, after it's done, have no pleasure at all. I want sort of immediate satisfaction. I'm not saying it's rational or right, it's just sort of what it was. When I was working, too, I never felt like I was doing something, in which case I never felt like I was accomplishing anything in line with my goals. You may be shocked to know, for instance, that folding a lot of messy clothing didn't exactly inspire me to feel good about myself. But that's no secret, really. I mean, most people would say that sort of job, that sort of retail, low-paying job, isn't meant for fulfillment, but rather for the external goal of payment, promotion, maybe even networking if you can do that somehow. But that's exactly my point. A lot of the most open jobs to other people are these sorts of jobs where we're doing a lot of something, but coming up shorthanded, feeling like we did nothing. And this nothing is more along the lines of not reaching your values rather than subverting ones that you don't care about. There's an essay, I'm going to sort of switch gears for a second. There's an essay by the egoist and nihilist anarchist Renzo Novatore called Towards the Creative Nothing. In this essay, Novatore rallies against many popular forces in society, such as democracy, Christianity, and morality. He contends that in enacting these sorts of oppositions in our lives, we can then leap towards this creative nothing, he calls, in its stead. And what Novatore means by that, generally speaking, is just a condition or context whereby life is celebrated rather than denied. And it is celebrated first and foremost by denial of things that are deemed sacred, so, the God, the state, stuff like that. Denying these things and going our own way and developing what our desires look like, rather than depending on things that give us reason to subjugate ourselves to phantoms of the mind, spooks, as the egoist Max Stirner calls them. The creative nothing is filled with laughter, delight of the absurd, large amounts of passion and struggle. It is a place where any and every individual sings their own melody proudly and loudly. One could describe the creative nothing then as more of a community than just a context or condition. It's a community of free spirits who decide to do something by engaging with and opening themselves up to the possibility of nothing. And to be clear, I'm not a nihilist, sorry. But I do love Novatore's prose. I actually have a review of his a collection of his writings online. And in switching up roles with the ideas of something nothing, I find very helpful. But in the end, it's sort of only a vague artistic vision. Novatore was better at fiction, I think, than nonfiction. All it seems to do is show what we might be after. Should we desire a world where people's abilities to grasp their values is much more straightforward. Now, the philosophy of nihilism is actually worth considering a bit more deeply. It's all centered around nothing, so I figured it's worth talking about. I'm not an expert on the subject, though, but I think one interesting thing I've learned about in the last several months is that there are actually different forms of nihilism, and people don't actually know that, but it may sound weird for a philosophy that centers around nothing or no value, inherent value to the universe, but it seems true nonetheless. When nihilists talk about nothing, they're talking about in the vein of more meaning and value systems, not retaining any useful content in practice. So it's very philosophical. The world has no inherent meaning, while our lives may be full of struggling to create meaning or derive some meaning from other people's work. In the end, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't matter. This goes further than the French philosopher Albert Camus, who, in comparison, said that such a struggle is absurd, but it's worth doing precisely because it's absurd. To divert for a minute, the only thing that actually keeps absurdism from being nihilism is in the name, the belief that these things do mean something, but it's often something not very useful or meaningful. That's not the same as there being no meaning or no use. There's still meaning and use, but it's one that's totally alien to our intentions. It just ends up looking a lot different. Camus counsels three possible ways to deal with the world: suicide, abstract belief in the theological, or acceptance of the absurd. Don't worry. You'll be happy to know that Camus dismissed suicide, just as reinforcing the absurd and doing nothing to actually engage with it. So, good news, everybody. Don't kill yourself. The second option is a bit more contentious. There's disagreement among absurdists about this. There are some Christian absurdists, like Soren Kierkegaard, who would say that the absurd requires there to be some sort of being that transcends the absurdity of life and thus would help us give us meaning in our lives. But Camus was an atheist, so he deemed this the equivalent of philosophical suicide. And so he also dismissed it as Bible. The last option, as you may have guessed, Camus agreed with. Camus thought that accepting the absurd, one might be able to better live with themselves and live more defiantly and freely in the face of such uncertainty. Uncertainty is a big part of absurdism and value creation. Uncertainty is a big part of why absurdism isn't nihilism, because both nihilism and existentialism, the prospect that one first exists and then creates what that existence means, are much more certain about the prospects of value creation or finding meaning in life. Existentialism says, and disclaimer, I'm biased, I agree with them, that value creation is not only possible, but it is an integral part of our lives. Nihilists say that such a process is inherently futile. But this is where the various forms of nihilism come into play, to get back to that. So-called political nihilism limits that futility to the governance structures that come into play in society. So anarchists actually overlap a bit with political nihilists, because for anarchists, they tend to see no inherent meaning to politicians' decrees. So, a lot of people sort of have that sort of stance on laws. In any case, these sorts of nihilists think that we could actually derive meaning from the universe, but we have to disestablish sort of the political powers. But maybe they support, who knows what they support after that. They could support monarchy, they could support anarchism, whatever, they're nihilists, and who knows. They're crazy. There's also the notion that nihilism in practice for some people is just a general tearing down of all the value systems so that we can build them back up. And I believe this is called like reconstructive or positive nihilism, which I know sounds contradictory. But don't quote me on that. I couldn't find the exact post that I was looking for. So, regardless, I agree with the French existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre on meaning and value, and that existence precedes essence, or in other words, that who we are isn't decided from some sort of nature, but rather our conscious actions as we go through in life. Now, the point of the presentation isn't to convince you of anything of that, just to examine the different ways that we look at nothing and something, and even if they're philosophical. We will end with some practical advice and also meditation if anyone's interested. So I suppose it makes sense for me to refer to Sartre's magnum opus, Being in Nothingness, but honestly I've never read it. It seems pretty relevant to this talk, but it's worth noting. The one time I tried to read it, I ended up taking a nap instead, but not because I was bored by it, but because I happened to be very tired, and apparently reading philosophy just doesn't quite get your gears going all the time. So lastly, in terms of this sort of section of my talk, I just want to delve, and I have one more section after this, I just want to delve into the language behind something and nothing, more particularly how it relates to the workplace. So there's all sorts of ways people represent nothing or something in what they do. For example, when workers feel disinclined to do what they're supposed to be doing, if it doesn't have a lot of value to them, but they slack off, they do nothing. Not that I would have any experience with that, of course. Or they'll give mediocre results instead of the optimal results expected by them to the boss. If, on the other hand, they feel there's a lot of weight and meaning to their life, then they're likely to give all they've got towards the job. They may even go above and beyond what's expected of them, although I don't recommend that. That's quite a bit of effort. Either way, the expectations they set for themselves, the expectations they set for themselves or the expectations laid out for them that they signed with the boss. This in turn makes bosses want to represent value to the workers so that the workers reciprocate. This is a little bit trickier than some bosses would like it to be, though. Some bosses think that you can simply raise wages for the workers, and a lot of left state socialists think this too, unfortunately, that you can just raise wages and the workers will be happier. But this isn't actually clear that it will result in long-term satisfaction. This is especially the case if workers actually aren't happy at their jobs they've got and they don't want to be there to begin with. Giving them more money may in the short run help them feel more at ease about working there, but it most likely won't relieve them of that non-nihilistic feeling in the pit of their stomach or in the back of their head. Slate writer Ray Fisman wrote back in 2011 that, quote, "In one of the first gift-exchange experiments involving real workers, students were employed in a 6-hour library data entry job, entering title, author, and other information from new books into a database. The pay was advertised as $12 an hour for 6 hours. Half the students were actually paid at this amount. The other half, expecting $12 an hour, were informed that they'd be paid $20 instead. All participants were told that this was a one-time job. Otherwise, the higher paid group might work harder in hopes of securing another overpaying library gig. The experimenters checked in every 90 minutes to calculate how many books had been logged. At the first check-in, the $20 employees had completed more than 50 books apiece, while the $12 an hour employees barely managed 40. In the second 90-minute stretch, the no-gift group maintained their 40 book pace, while the gift group fell from more than 50 to 45. For the last half of the experiment, the gifted employees performed no better, 40 books per 90-minute period, than the ungifted ones. The goodwill of high wages took less than 3 hours to evaporate completely, hardly a prescription for boosting long-term productivity." So, Fisman also implicitly acknowledged from the get-go this is a new sort of experiment. So, I mean, you need to replicate these things, and they need to actually be seen as sort of like something that, is more scientifically valuable or valid. But still, it certainly poses some questions for people who think you can just raise people's wages and they'll suddenly be happier at their jobs. It just doesn't seem that easy. If it was that easy, this study would have been, pretty plain. But it's a lot more complicated than that, it seems. Either way, there are definitely certain different approaches workers can take to deal with the existential absurdity of modern day work. I do talk about that on my blog. If you want some tools on how you might deal with a workplace that you're not happy with, I recommend TJ Webb's The Efficient Slacker, which you can find on abolishwork.com. Features George Costanza. You should always learn from the best. So if you look annoyed all the time, you'll always seem like you're busy. So just do that. Have an annoyed face. So, conclusion. Talking about some very simple things like saving the world, actually saving the universe. To wrap things up, let's get practical for a second, talk physics, and how lazy people are going to save the world. This is the whole hook of my thing. A popular YouTube channel for learning about science and a lot of other things called Vsauce recently had a video called "Did the Past Really Happen?" Around the 8-minute mark, the host Michael starts talking about entropy. This will be a long quote, sorry. Entropy is often called disorder or chaos, but entropy is very different from macroscopic messiness. Michael then goes on to use a deck of cards, explaining that shuffling the deck and making it disorganized doesn't actually increase its energy output. However, entropy in the greater world around us has increased because in order to shuffle the cards, my body had to do work. Work in the sense of effort, not in the sense of that I'm against work, but you get what I mean. It has to take energy concentrated in my cells and change and disperse that energy into kinetic energy, movement, and a little bit of heat from my body, and from the cards, friction, and a little bit of sound energy, that rustling noise. So there's your real legacy. Your contribution to the universe is growing entropy. No process will be able to undo the net increase in entropy you accomplish in your life. The ripples you leave behind may get redirected, but the universe will never be able to forget the entropy you had. That's the law, the second law of thermodynamics. Many scientists believe this means that eventually energy, heat, will be completely spread out evenly throughout the universe. It will be the same temperature everywhere. And at that point, nothing will be able to happen. Because in order for something to happen, entropy needs to increase. Energy needs to spread, to move, to change. This may be the ultimate fate of the universe, thermodynamic equilibrium, or the heat death of the universe. It's been estimated that the rate things happen this end of the universe, it will occur in a Google year, so that's like 10 to the 10 power or something like that. It's a crazy number, it's not exactly relevant. And you're contributing to it simply by existing. A funny consequence of all this is that the fact that people who aren't very active, people who don't do much but lay around, aren't just being lazy. In a way, they're being considerate. Sloth may be a vice, but to the universe, it's a fountain of youth. Choosing to do as little as possible means consciously limiting your contribution to the inevitable dispersal of energy, and thus, in a teeny, tiny, small way, postponing the heat death of our universe. Relaxing adds time to the universe's life in an amount of time, to be fair, almost indistinguishable from zero. But still, theoretically real. Being lazy will make the universe last longer. So thanks for chilling out. Thanks for taking it easy. And workers of the world, relax. Cool. So we'll get into questions. I also thought it'd be cool. I guess people do meditation in the mornings. So it's kind of weird to do it now, but meditation. I guess I'll just say this instead of doing the practice. I don't know, but like meditation is a great way to do nothing and feel like. I'm not coming at it from a sort of new agey perspective, but more like scientific. It helps you with stress. It helps you with depression and stuff like that. So I try to do about 5-minute meditations in the morning. And you know, it seems to help me out a little bit. I remember a few weeks ago I was talking to my partner. I was helping them clean their room, and he was thinking about something while I was picking up a table. He was supposed to be helping me, and I picked it up and I thought he had the other end. He didn't, and I was like, Darragon, be in the present, not the future. And he's looking at me like, wow, you really are meditating. So anyway, question. Yes.
This was in the, one of the things that you just said rather recently is how can, what exactly is an efficient slacker and how can a slacker be efficient?
Sure. So I think that there's this cool website. Basically it says the first rule of being a good programmer. I'm not a programmer, disclaimer. So I don't know if this is actually true. You'd have to ask your local programmer, and you're in the libertarian movement, so I mean, like, you know, pick your pick. But stereotypically speaking. But yeah. Anyway, one of the first value, it was either the first or second, is to be lazy. And sort of laziness helps you get things done in the most efficient way possible because you want to minimize the amount of effort you're actually doing. You still want the product, you still want the end result, but you don't want the process to be so time-consuming and unhappy that you do it for longer than you need to. So in a way, I think laziness actually can make people be more efficient. I think procrastination, it's not a good panacea, or I wouldn't always say procrastination is good. Trust me, I don't think that because I wrote these things a few days ago. But and that's not good for your stress. But yeah, sometimes actually being lazy, and I'm being sincere here, it actually can help with efficiency. I think there is something to that.
However, you don't have to stress 2 days versus how long you stress a week or you do it.
Yeah, I mean, I procrastinate for a while. My problem, I'm a writer and a video editor. My problem isn't, I never get writer's block while I'm writing. I almost never do, I should say. I always get it before I start. It's like starting is like jumping off a cliff. It's like, and you don't know where you're going to land. It's like, damn, that's a good metaphor. I'm not trying to compliment myself. I just thought that off. Anyway, sorry, that came off really self-aggrandizing. Anyway, it's like jumping off a cliff and like not knowing where you're going to land, and it's like, it's really scary. It's like, I don't know what the hell I was going to write, I only wrote this like 3 or 4 days ago. I'm not recommending that, by the way. That's the form of procrastination we not recommend. But it worked out, I think. Some of it I think is a little, could be better, and I think some of it is a little rambly. But I originally just put up the title, Doing Nothing as an Alternative to Something. It was like, yeah, let's be cheeky about it. It'll get some people interested, and it'll be fun. It'll be a fun presentation, not entirely serious. But the sort of the history of the slacker, there's this great book, I wish I brought it, called, Hardly Working, or something? It's a book about the history of slackers and loungers and loafers and stuff like that, and it's really great history. I really recommend it. I can't remember what it's called, but if anyone's interested, I actually have the book, and I'll look it up on my phone and I'll tell you. But it's a great book, and in it always says that slackers always have a sort of a wink and a nod about themselves. They know that like they're not really conforming to a lot of ideas, but in a strange way they kind of have to. It's kind of the anarchist paradox too, and you use the roads and all that stuff. Morose. God, I hate that. But yeah, so like the slacker is always kind of self-aware that like they're always going to kind of contradict themselves, and that there's always going to be sort of a wink and a nod to, I do things a lot, but I like to call myself a slacker. Somebody actually once said, Nick, you're not a very good slacker, and I'm like, that's because I'm slacking on being a slacker. See, so I get
That's good, I like that.
Yeah, so-
Slacking on being a slacker, that's
Exactly.
classic. baby.
Thank you. But yeah, so does anybody else have any questions? I'm happy to take questions about anything else related to the talk. Yeah.
So is what you're basically advocating that people like just not work whatsoever, or that people like get jobs that they make, or even if it's not a job, like make some fucking money on the in the Agora.
Sure.
But just like be a slacker in life in general, like have a good time when they're not working and maximize pleasure basically.
Yes.
Or, like, just
I mean,
not work at
I'm
all.
not a hedonist, but like I have some hedonist sympathies, which is weird because I don't drink and I don't do drugs, so that's a bit weird. Like if I really was a hedonist and had so many sympathies, you'd think I'd be doing those things, but like I have different sort of.
I mean, I'm cool with people doing whatever the fuck
Sure,
they want.
sure.
I don't care if someone smokes crack.
Sure. Yeah. But yeah, exactly. But yeah, and I know somebody actually who does do sort of harder stuff and does it safely, responsibly.
Yeah. I know.
Even if that's not what a lot of people do. But yeah, so I just want to respond directly to the question. I guess what I'm saying is, yeah, I mean, it's sort of a slacker ethos in your general life, and I'm not against people having a job or having. I guess this sort of cultural expectation that you have to have a job even though you hate it. There's a lot of it. The job makes up your identity too, which really creeps me out as a libertarian because I'm an individualist and I don't think people should subvert themselves to their job. They usually, and I'm totally guilty of this, and so this isn't calling anybody out, but like when you talk to someone, one of the first things you say to them is, "What do you do?" And you don't mean like, "What'd you do yesterday?" or "What do you do for fun?" It's like, "What do you do
How
to
do
get
you
paid?"
make money?
Yeah, what do you do to get paid so you don't get kicked out of your house for not paying the rent?
How do you make your money, honey?
Exactly. I would say that too, Andrew. I'm kidding. But yeah, so and so there's this way that I think is similar. The nation state sort of subverts our identity to sort of belong to it, and I think the modern corporation does this too. We have to think of ourselves as an associate, and like there's all these funny, Dilbert-esque sort of names that we have to associate to put ourselves with. I mean, I even use the term associate sometimes. My friend looked at me like, "Dude, what the hell did you just say?" I'm like, "Oh my god, I've been at work too long. I'm calling people associates instead of actual fucking human beings." In Walmart, it's all about the team. It's all about team effort, but not unions. Unions are a bad team effort because it actually threatens the bosses. That's a different conversation, but and I mean more like radical unions like the IWW, not like AFL-CIO or whatever. But anyway, so I guess so it's sort of just like anybody who's seen The Big Lebowski? I mean, I like the dude. I don't think everybody should live like him, but I like that he's so cool and casual, except about his Persian rug, and that was unfortunate.
You did tie the room together.
It did. Thank you, God. It was so good. I don't know. It's hard to distinctify this completely, but it's like I'm not against effort, and I'm not. People think like, oh, I just don't want anybody to do anything, and it's like that's not true. And then you can't do that anyway. Like I'm not asking people to have a death wish. So I don't know. More charitable interpretations of anti-work stuff would be nice, but I understand why people are so. I mean, it's the same thing with libertarianism. We don't need to go there now, but people are like, what? You're a commie? I'm like, no. There's a whole tradition within anarchist thought, individualist anarchism, mutualism, blah blah blah. Anyway, any other questions? Yeah, Andrew.
I guess just I like to point out that science kind of takes laziness as a virtue. Occam's razor, and I was a physics major, and my professor had to say, what's the best answer is the laziest answer. Like laziness in science is seen as a good thing.
Absolutely. See, so laziness now brought to you by science.
No.
Science. It's like that Breaking Bad memes. But anyway, Carl, did you have a question?
How does an able-bodied person under the age of 65 who isn't like a war veteran, how are you supposed to not work?
Sure.
If you're not like living off of someone's lawsuit, if you don't have a rich father.
Sure.
How does that?
Yeah. So I think mutual aid is really important in a given society. There's stuff like that right now on a small scale. So like share sharing. There's also people who do I think there's sort of a community building up within the New Hampshire sort of community of that was redundant of sort of like I can't remember. I know Jessica Love and like Jack are starting it up, and it's called like I think that's called
Shire Co-op.
Yeah, well, the Shire Co-op's kind of like the mutual aid thing too, like low cost food, and it helps people who might otherwise not afford it. That's my understanding. I could be wrong though. I don't know the particulars of their institute. But generally, I think mutual aid is very important for people who are elderly, or disabled, or poor. Community support, churches, community potlucks, and stuff like that. I know that I've definitely had good meals for cheap, via good communities that I wouldn't otherwise have. And even though I come off as pretty able-bodied, I mean, I do have Asperger's, and I do have issue with social interaction. For example, I would never do an hour of intense physical looking at people just to say that I did nothing for an hour, because that would be awful for me. I can't even look at people in the eye right now. Like, I'm just like, you see me like shuffling, looking at the floor. It's because I hate eye contact. So, yeah, I know. I think mutual aid is very important, so is solidarity and sort of community or I know these are very general answers, but like they sort of form more practically and concretely in sort of mutual aid institutions. They're based on just helping people and helping the most needy, especially. But I don't think they should be like charity. It's a distinction between solidarity and charity that I'm not sure I can get into here. But I think there is a difference between sort of empowering people so they can do their own thing, and so they're not long-term dependent, and sort of like charities sometimes seem to just be rich people giving a little bit to the poor so they can feel better about themselves. So not saying that's everybody, I'm just saying that is something that happens sometimes. Anyway, yeah.
I guess to elaborate a little further on my previous question,
Sure.
like what are you advocating that people do for money, essentially? Because like there's whatever I don't know if you're one of the anti-money people or
I'm not.
I didn't think so, honestly,
Yeah.
But I mean, like even if I know people that are anti-money that still do things to make money because they're like, well, it sucks, but that's the world we live in.
So I think there's a great example of what I'm talking about. So Karl Hess, one of my favorite libertarians of all time, he's sorely understudied, under-talked about. Thought it was a good idea in the 1960s to write the IRS. He decided to pull a Snoopy and say to the IRS, Declaration of Independence is blah, 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 and I don't really want to pay you guys anymore, so I'm not gonna. So this is my letter, and for those in the audio, I just flipped off the IRS abstractly. So just so everybody on the audio caught that. Because I know we don't all have eyes and ears, whatever, sorry. I took the joke too far, I think got away from me. Anyway, Karl Hess did that. That was a very dumb thing. They're just like, oh, you're not going to pay us. Wow, that's really unfortunate. I guess we're going to have to take all your property. So they put 100% lien on all his property. I think he's one of the only people who they've ever done this to. If you look up on his Wikipedia, I'm pretty sure it's something like that. I know Wikipedia. He's a definitive source of all information. But yeah, they put 100% lien on his property. They took everything he owned.
What does that mean, a lien on his property?
Basically, they seized it from him. It's just a legal term. Basically, like they seized it from him. He didn't own it anymore. So how the hell would Karl Hess survive in an anti-work world? Well, basically did it, but he wasn't anti-money, by the way. He was a libertarian. But he survived through community aid and bartering. He was a very skilled sort of a tradesman. He did a lot of sort of welding and stuff like that for trades. He enjoyed it. That's what he liked doing.
Doesn't that work?
Well, so I don't think it's work in the sense that I'm talking about, because the sort of work that I'm talking about has more to do with certain institutions and structures.
Working for other people.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, so I guess I want to say that work for economic ends is sort of like subjugating your individual interests for external rewards. So like the approval of other people, or like, this is very objectivist Randian thing for me to say, but and I'm not either, but it's doing things for other people's approval or doing them just because of the money. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm saying it's morally wrong. You got to do what you got to do. I've done that too. But I don't think we should have a society where most people depend on that sort of relationship to work. Where most people depend on sort of a thing that they don't like doing, 8 hours of the day, come home and do things they like. It seems to be very counterproductive if one wants to have sort of a healthy, virtuous life, that we spend so much time doing something we don't like. And like, that's not true for everyone. There are some people who love their job, and I never tell them. There are certainly Marxists who will tell you, I'm not a Marxist, that they're just brainwashed or whatever, that they really don't like their job and they're just pretending, whatever. There's I can't remember what the concept is, but there's a concept in Marxism that's sort of like basically like some workers are just fooling themselves and they don't recognize their class interests or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I do think there are people who enjoy doing what they do. I enjoy writing and I enjoy video editing. Sometimes it's hard for me to start, but once I do, I always feel better. I felt really great after I wrote this presentation, even though I was really, just I kept putting it off, doing other things. Usually what I do is I do active procrastination, which is I'll do smaller tasks that are important but not as important, and I'll work my way up to what I actually really want to do. Like a few days ago, I was feeling pretty down and depressed, and so instead of just not doing anything, which I was sorely tempted to do, let me tell you, just because of how down I was, I started, with laundry, and then I worked my way up. I did bigger and bigger things, and it got easier for me. If you work yourself up and take it bit by bit, you can actually, I know this sounds like BS life advice, but I'm not making any money off this, so you can trust me. It's a pyramid scheme where I don't benefit. It really helped me to just start from the bottom and sort of work my way up. I don't know I hope that was helpful. I know I'm like speaking kind of, there's a great essay by the post-Marxist Andrea Gores, I know we're talking about Marxism, where he defines 3 different types of work, which is work for economic ends, work for domestic ends, and then sort of autonomous activity. And sort of most of the sort of work that I'm objecting to is not working for yourself, but working for other people's needs. And I think, and I'm not saying there's anything inherently wrong with an individual action in a vacuum, but in a context where most of the economy and most people are dependent on that type of relationship, doing something they don't like 8 hours of the day, I think there's something wrong with that sort of economy where people are really unhappy and they don't like to talk about their job and I don't know. It strikes me that something wrong is going on. Yeah.
So would you say you're sympathetic to autarky with a K, meaning,
like Heinlein? Was that Heinlein's thing? Or no, that was Lafargue, right? Lafargue?
Yeah, I think he was the autarky with a CH, which
okay.
is sovereignty. But then there's autarky with a K, which is
okay.
kind of an opposition to the division of labor. Non-alienation of labor.
Sure.
So all labor is non-alienated as opposed to alienated. You're seeing your own end, using your own end.
Right.
Autarky.
There's complications here. I think some people misunderstood me elsewhere about being against the division of labor. I'm not. I sort of half-heartedly, tongue-in-cheek, agree with Heinlein that specialization is for insects, but I don't think that means the specialization is inherently bad. I kind of like it as a useful, quick thing to sort of undermine how important people think the division of labor is. I think it is important. Like even Proudhon, who was a mutualist and left libertarian, thought the division of labor was important. So did Dyer D. Lum, who was another mutualist. I mean, it's I definitely think these things are important, but I think that they're overstated. I think that sometimes resources and responsibilities can be shared cooperatively. There doesn't need to be clear lines between certain people. I think that's very helpful. Like in Occupy, for example, there were facilitators and mediators, and there were also note takers, and that's a division of labor. I think that's very helpful. But I think that division of labor happens freely and spontaneously. It doesn't happen because of capitalism or the state. I'm not against. I guess I'm sympathetic to autarky in that sense. Yeah. Because I don't think the division of labor is as important as other libertarians do. But I still think it's a valid thing for sure. I'm not against it. I don't think I have the knowledge to be against it.
Well, it seems like as we move into the future, autarky, maybe whereas once it was just technologically impossible, if we all have 3D printers making everything we'll ever need in our basements, then it actually becomes possible.
Yeah, it's certainly true that technology is helping out the laziest people, although there are certainly short-term problems where it's displacing workers, and I hate how leftists are sometimes against that because it's like, damn it, the workers are usually leaving pretty awful jobs that they didn't like, and I understand that now they don't have jobs. That's terrible, and that stuff should be ameliorated as much as possible. But it's not a clear picture of good and bad. And I think there's a mix of good things that workers are being displaced, or bad things that workers are being displaced, but good that sort of we don't need those workers as much anymore. They can go and be sort of more productive or more useful to the economy in other ways, and I think that's a good thing. I mean, it's a mix of benefits. Anyway, a few more questions. Yeah.
I guess one thing I could say in support of being against work in the sense of a traditional job, it is technically immoral in the fact that you're paying taxes and those taxes are going towards whatever the fuck they're going towards. And for that reason, I'd advocate all out agorism. Definitely, don't do anything with the state, and
sure.
That way you're not funding fucking bombs getting dropped on people.
Exactly. And yeah, and I'm sympathetic to that. I mean, I only take it so far, but I definitely advocate agorism, and I definitely advocate, peacefully and voluntarily trading with people, regardless of whatever the state's edicts are. And I think these things are things that people can enjoy, and they're things that can benefit society on the whole, especially if you're intentionally. I think the thing about agorism, counter-economics, actually, the practice of agorism is sort of like, you have to be intentionally and consciously like against the state. Like people criticize Konkin's example of the USSR as a counter economy, or it wasn't a good example of a counter economy, precisely because no one in it was trying to undermine the state. They were just doing it to survive. It's not exactly a good example of a counter economy because no one really thought it was counter. They just thought it was normal life to them. And while it still proves that the black market can be helpful for people's survival, it doesn't really help prove that we can prosper under it. So the evidence is a little weaker than both sides, I think it is. And I'm not an agorist anymore, so I mean, like, not totally relevant to me in any case, whether it is or isn't. But yeah, I certainly agree with you. I mean, I'd only take it so far, but I mean, I have much more sort of broader critiques of the corporate structure than just they pay taxes. But yeah, that's definitely one of them. I think people like Cody Wilson have definitely learned the hard way that the corporate structure is not very easily trustable, even if, for example, you're UPS and you have a history of supporting gun organizations like the NRA. If you sort of try to 3D print guns, heaven forbid that happen, and the UPS actually help you sort of, ship your stuff all over the country. So
Sandra Spooner would have helped.
Yeah, Sandra Spooner. Yeah, and actually, there's a cool little sort of Uber of products, which is like called Roadie, and it's a new application for smartphones, and they're trying to be like the Uber of, I guess, packages. And they recently there's this big chain called Waffle House, and which sounds awesome. I want to go. And basically what they do is that anybody who's signed up with Roadie can meet up with their customer or whatever, meet up with their client, whatever, and they can use Waffle House as a free place to sort of meet up, and they'll even get a free dinner and stuff like that. They're kind of like networking with Roadie. Waffle House is to sort of make a deal for people so they're like 24/7 diners, and they're usually off the highway and stuff like that, really accessible. So they think that it's a good idea to sort of like, mesh the two things together. It's really cool. I still don't like that Waffle House is also a corporation. It's a franchise thing. So I'm still a little wary of it, but it seems like a positive thing anyway.
Well, like Uber, would that be kind of a return to something that you'd support more than, say, if the corporation owns the car versus if you own the car, it's less alienated, you're more in control of your own...
Yeah. I think Kevin Carson has written a few good essays about why Uber is still criticizable from a libertarian perspective. I like Uber. I've ridden in Uber or Lyft or whatever, but they're indistinguishable to me. But I've ridden in them a few times, and my experiences were fine. I don't have anything personally against them. I don't think they're as good as an example as libertarianism in practice as some people do. I think they're worthy of critique, but for what they are compared to the cab companies, oh hell yeah, they're great. Like, no question about that. That isn't saying much though, because cab companies kind of stuck with the whole medallion system. Even most cabbies will tell you that. I have a friend who's a cabbie, and he rants all day about sort of his bosses and his dispatcher and how awful they are to him, And Uber employees still have employers. It's not like they're completely on their own. They can still get the boot if they piss off the wrong people. And there have been some critiques of that, but
not according to Uber. According to Uber, they're their customers, not their employees.
Yeah, that's not. I'm not freaking buying that. But anyway, I think that's about it. If we want to talk more informally, that's cool. But I'm glad I did something for everybody. So there you go.
You did nothing.
I did nothing. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Are you the last event for these things?
Yes, nobody else is going to be doing something, so I had to do nothing about it. All right, end.